Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today.
Welcome back to Find a Moment. This is Jennifer, and I've got Gretchen here. We are getting into our 6th episode in our Honest Parenting series, and I know I can speak for both of us. This has been such a fantastic extended dive into something that is so common for just everybody. I think I said in our last episode, it was like one of the most universal parts of the human experience, and it really is. Like, I don't know a better way to describe it. No matter the culture, no matter the region of the world, no matter what age, throughout the ages, it is something that every generation has experienced. And so we felt like it was appropriate to just kind of have an open-ended series. We have no idea how many episodes we're going to do. We kind of do at this point now because we've done so many. So this is number 6, but we just really felt like it would be important for us to take some time just kind of moving through a lot of the different parts. We've talked about faith. We've talked about discipline. We talked about spanking. If you have questions about that, and especially as a family of faith, as Christians, if you are wondering what our position on that might be, you can scroll back through our episodes for that topic. But today we are finishing up the group of episodes in this series where we are talking about specific age ranges. So we are finally getting into 18 plus. We've done a little disclaimer at the front of most of these episodes, which I think would be good for us to just stick in here before we get started. Yeah, so today, and I will go ahead and say too, I don't have experience with 18 plus kids, except that I was one time. I guess I still am. But in terms of actually parenting adult children, Gretchen is the one here with the experience in that department.
And that is still very new.
Lots of good fruit though. But I see the good fruit though. So Gretchen, if you'll give us this disclaimer, and then I'll kind of go through like the highlight list of what we'll talk about, and then we'll start getting deep.
That sounds great. Yes, so our disclaimer is that we do not claim to be the authorities or the absolute expert in parenting. We are just two friends having a conversation, sharing what we have learned along the way. And along those same lines, we do not have any affiliations or endorsements. We do not financially benefit from the podcast or any of the links that we have on our show notes page. Those are all just general Amazon links, and you are free to purchase those books from wherever you want, if you want to, but those are just ones that we have read that are our recommendations. Just so you know that we are speaking from just a place of humility and vulnerability and honesty, and not from a place of endorsing or being affiliated with any program or anything like that.
I think that's really important. The longer we go, because it's always been this way. We've never financially gained from what we're doing. In fact,
Right.
Like you mentioned the first time that we talked about this, like this actually costs. It's a significant time investment for both of us. And then Gretchen does all of the editing and all the tech things and putting together all of the beautiful social media things that you see online from us. That's all Gretchen. And there's also some financial investment that she's made on the back end of things. So this is very much a ministry for us. And every time we remind our listeners, and every time I'm reminded of that, I'm very grateful that we can speak from a place of just wanting to serve and love the people who hear what we believe the Lord is wanting us to share. I'm just really grateful for that. Mm-hmm. So what I'll do, Gretchen, I think I'll just start out and kind of read through the list of the general topics that we're going to cover, and then we'll start back at the top of those and kind of dig deep into each one. So we're going to talk about autonomy, making faith and rhythms their own, including things like holidays, talking about significant others and the dynamics involved there, and then children and grandparent, kind of navigating through the dynamics of those relationships. And so I'm pretty confident that Somewhere as we weave through all of that, we're going to have some tangents as we always do, and that is totally fine. We are going where the chat leads us. So let's circle back up to the top and start talking about autonomy. And Gretchen, I would just love for you to kind of start with what you have in mind to share for that.
Sure. So we have launched three of our five children into adulthood. And to kind of summarize the autonomy process, I feel like up until the point that they kind of graduate from high school, and it probably starts a few years before that, but definitely once they kind of launch into adulthood, up until that point, you have been kind of the primary voice. Their parents are kind of the really the authority and the one that kind of sets the boundaries. And then also the one that's kind of the primary, especially in the younger years, you're their mentor, you're their primary source, and you are the primary voice speaking into their life. Now, as they get older, they have other voices of friends and, teachers and small group leaders and things like that. But by far and away, the amount of time that you spend with them, this most significant is from birth to 18. And then once you launch them into adulthood, you are really giving them a whole new level of autonomy, and you are one of the many voices speaking into their life. I think as a parent, you kind of have to wrap your mind around that and your heart around that. And it's definitely, I feel like, a process. And some children, I feel like, may want you speaking into their life more than others. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about a lot is really knowing your children. And that's so much of what parenting in it is understanding who they are and helping them discover who they are, seeing what they need, what their strengths are, what they need help with. And you are not really the rudder on the ship, but you're just kind of a part of the ship helping to navigate them through their life. So, yeah, you're not really losing your primary voice, but you're becoming more like one of many.
I feel like that's something as they are kind of like once they get to like the halfway point in high school, you have to start kind of prepping the runway a little
Hmm.
bit with that. And I can feel it like today, things like money management, and giving them opportunities to practice that before they are completely on their own. Dealing with things like doctor's appointments, filling out
Hmm.
the paperwork. We just did that today. You got to check out. Okay, you go to the checkout desk. This is, and them kind of not, okay, when I get there, what? So all of these kind of day-to-day things, but then also things that don't happen very often, and making sure I've had to consciously step back and say, even
Hmm.
though I'm here, I think you should probably take over this,
Right.
just so that you know what it's like to interact with somebody at the front desk in a doctor's office, and you know what kind of forms you're going to have to fill out and what they're going to ask for. So even kind of the practicing part of that being maybe like June 17, 18, 16, 17, 18. I
Yeah.
guess when they get their driver's license, when they have that autonomy to kind of move around, they're able to, whether it's shopping or errands or whatever, they start to kind of spread their wings and get some confidence with that. But then it's things like paying a bill or calling to make an appointment or, some of the things I mentioned. I feel like those are things where I've had to be mindful to say, I think you need to practice this before it's fully your responsibility.
Yes.
What were some of the things that you could see, like preparing for that autonomy? What were some of the
Mhm.
ways that you kind of created I guess like a runway or an on-ramp
Right.
for them?
I feel like we kind of did two different areas mainly. We're kind of the home preparation as far as like they were doing all of their own laundry and cleaning their own bathroom. And like I think I'd mentioned in a previous episode about learning to cook some of their favorite meals. Definitely grocery shopping, having a meal plan list and going and getting those things. And then I think because, I think we've talked about the book, Reclaiming Conversation, because I think the generation that's kind of teens and young adults right now, they have had so much texting and not really a lot of conversation, maybe as much as previous generations. Like you said, with just interacting with front desk people and things like that. So outside of the home, it was definitely a lot of those conversations, groceries, going to the bank and setting up their own checking account. Then once they turn 18, even like, a lot of the doctor's offices have a patient portal. Well, once they turn 18, they are like, at least where we are, they are automatically disconnected from your account. So like I can't even go on there and make them an appointment. So helping even just for them to navigate what that portal is like beforehand, because
Mhm.
they have to be in charge of that once they're 18. So yeah, we did a lot of in the home things, just as far as like preparing them, if they were going off to college, that they would be a good roommate, that they would keep their area somewhat organized, but just managing, okay, how often do I need to do my laundry? Washing dishes and taking out trash and things like that. So a lot of just the home things, I feel like we started fairly young and just worked that in. And then the money management, as far as, like I said, having their own account, adding them to a credit card so that they can get used to that process of using a card and keeping track of it too, not losing things like that. And then as far as like vehicle maintenance of like changing oil and flat tires and things like that, I feel like those were definitely important things to learn before launching out to.
Those are good. And those all feel like very kind of practical day-to-day things that we do. But I think in involving them incrementally in all of that, and one of the things that I find myself doing now is like when I get an explanation of benefits statement from our health insurance or like our mortgage statement or some kind of random bill, I'll leave it out on the counter, and there will be times when I try to be intentional with the girls and say, come look at this. I just want to show you what this is because I don't want the first time you ever see it to be when you're out of the house. I want
Hmm.
you to understand and also have an idea of the type of expenses that we
Right.
deal with every month. The water's not free, the power's not free. Yes, it really does. Yes, we do have to pay partly for the lights on our street, like the street lights. So just giving it's that awareness. They're not responsible for any of it, but just that early exposure, I feel like is one of the ways that I've tried to help. And my dad was really good about that,
Mm.
about that he'd be doing something, doesn't need any help, things that maybe weren't necessary for me to know in the moment. But he was really, part of it is his personality. He enjoyed kind of coaching and mentoring and teaching, but it also gave me some good practical skills and helped me to be
Mhm.
exposed. He'd say, come look at this. I'm going to show you what I'm doing. So I didn't feel like I was just kind of cast into the wilderness when the time
Yeah.
came.
And I think it's so good to have that awareness even before it's imminently on the horizon.
Hmm.
Because there are so many of those things that aren't, like you said, that don't happen as like daily. And so
Right.
you want to capture those moments when you can teach those things when they just naturally are occurring.
Okay, so the next stop for us in this chat is about making faith and rhythms their own. And then we've got things like holidays and traditions and things like that. So, Gretchen, what are some of the ways that you have been intentional about that? And what are some of the things that you've seen that were valuable?
Hmm. I think a lot of that is a continuation of our teen years discussion. And if you have not listened to that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to that because Jennifer, you really explained it so beautifully as far as entering into those faith discussions and allowing them to process on their own, but yet be a resource for answering questions and guiding them. And I definitely feel like relinquishing that, and I don't really want to say authority, but relinquishing that kind of primary role, I feel like that is a really hard one to do as far as faith and letting them question and letting them struggle and letting them have discussions and work through things without an attitude of judgment or condemnation or disappointment. I think that's a really hard place as a parent, especially when faith is such a central part of your own life and your own story. But with that, I always have to remind myself of, I think we talked about it in the last episode, like about my teen years and my young 20 years. And it was such a wandering wilderness time. And God has used that as a huge part of my story. And He's used that to give me compassion for others that I wouldn't have had I not walked through that wilderness. But as a parent, seeing a child walk into the wilderness and knowing all the potential, it really is a surrendering to the Lord and trusting that, like, God is working in their life, even if they don't acknowledge it or they don't see it, or if they're questioning it. One of our episodes, I was listening to clips of and some of the reels that we had shared with Catherine in our suffering series. And she talked about wrestling and that how we think that someone doesn't have, maybe you think they don't have a strong faith if they're wrestling or they're questioning or that they're lost or whatever, but that she said there's no more intimate posture than wrestling. And I think a lot of times, well-meaningly as parents, we can overprotect. And I know that I probably have along the way because you don't want them to get hurt or do, this and that to happen. But there is value and growth in the struggle that you just don't get. It's like trying to build muscle without lifting weights. You have to have the weight. And sometimes when they are struggling or wrestling with faith or going through those challenges, it's like building muscle.
I do feel like we really got into some kind of meat of this, like the faith conversation in our previous episode with teens, and just some of, like, for us, for our family, the things that we kind of have walked through with that. And I have also felt like fear can play a part
Mhm.
in a parent's response to their child's questioning about faith. And fear could be, for different reasons. And I would just say that if fear is part of that, to really take the time and ask the Lord to search your heart, because fear can drive us to pursue certain things or to handle things in a certain way that really isn't authentic and true to where our hearts are. But it gets so lost in translation because our fear just takes, like, our the pureness of our motives, which is love for our children, and a desire for them to know and love and have relationship with the Lord. It takes, our fear takes all of that, and it just kind of contorts it and mangles it in the way that it comes out, and it doesn't feel loving and caring to the person that we are
Mm,
actually loving and caring for. But in
right.
some ways, I think fear makes it more about ourselves, and it keeps us from being fully available and open to trusting what the Lord is planning in their life. And I think it also is just kind of this invitation from God to say, don't you trust me with your kid? Like,
Right.
I love them infinitely more than you can imagine. Their
Hmm.
story is infinitely more available and purposeful in my hands. Psalm
Right.
139 says every day of their life is written before, in the book of life, before a single moment. So, like, God already knows the beginning and the middle and the end. And for us being so short-sighted in our humanity, we just get graspy and scared because we
Hmm.
can't see what's coming next. And I can only attribute it to the gift of the Lord, the Holy Spirit, that I have had the freedom to open my hands. But I also know I would much rather be open-handed with my child's faith journey and trust that God is sovereign in that, just like He has been sovereign in my life. I would much rather have that posture than to have the continuous turmoil every Sunday. No, you're going to church. No, you're doing this. No, you're doing that. Oh, this is who we are. This is what we believe. And I do not want that, just the grasping. And then
Right.
there's going to be the resisting.
Hmm.
Then your children will resist that because they feel the tension. It's like when we were talking, we haven't aired this episode yet, but we were talking, we've got an interview coming up with a couple moms of toddlers, and one of the things that we talked about was like when you want your baby to relax and to go to sleep, if you're tense and you're stressed and you're like, why won't you
Hmm.
just go to sleep? Like they feel that. So then they resist sleep because they
Right.
sense it. So like how much more do our teens notice when they feel us kind of like grasping and just kind
Hmm.
of hooking in? It's really counterproductive. And yet somehow we still keep like that just becomes kind of this tendency.
Yes. And I think it becomes more of a challenge when they are launched into adulthood because you're feeling that loss of control, and then fear makes you want to control something. And yeah, that's definitely tricky. And I think that leads me to one of the things I wanted to talk about too is about praying for your adult children. And, I spend so much time praying for my adult children. And I just, as I'm going throughout the day and thinking about what they're doing and where they are, and just praying that God's going to bring people into their life, to bring mentors in, to bring people that can be part of a community and that can do life with them. And I think that's one of the lessons I've learned through this series so much, especially when we talk, when we share the interviews that we've done, is just the importance of community. Community as moms, community as for our children, and just to go through life with having people who know you and see you and can help you walk through those difficult times together. So praying for all of that and believing that God is going to provide. And along those lines, I think being willing yourself to be that person for someone else's young adult. I meet with several different young women and are doing different book studies and different kind of mentoring things, and realizing that we can speak into the lives of young adults and encourage them and mentor them and be someone to help them process the questions, like we want someone else to be that with our children too. And I did not realize how much of a blessing to me it would be to have this time with these young women and for them to ask my opinion and to come to me and call me when they need prayer and they need someone to pray with them about a situation. And just having that availability and walking through life with other young people and believing that there are other people that can do that for your adult children also.
I am so glad to just be reminded of how important it is for us to have community with women who are a season ahead.
Hmm.
I feel like it's important for us to kind of have the before, the now, and the after in our
Yes.
community, right? So people who are not quite where we are yet, so we can pour into them, and the people who are where we are, so that we can relate, and then people who are beyond, so that we can receive and be poured into, and just be reminded of the why. We've had so many conversations about the releasing and the praying for your adult children,
Hmm.
and I am just not able to grasp what, like, fast forwarding, a few years into kind of what season will be once our oldest daughter is on her own. I just cannot fast forward and give myself kind of what seems like somewhat of a close guess of how that will feel.
Hmm.
I can't. So to our listeners, our children are both in the Wilmington Symphony Youth Orchestra program. So our kids play in different groups, but so we're all at the same concert. Gretchen and I are at all the same concerts together for our kids who both play violin. And always at the last concert of the season, they play Pomp and Circumstance, and they recognize the seniors, and they walk across the stage, and they have the slideshow telling what everybody's going to do. And it's a really big deal. Well, this year, so our older daughter, who's in the orchestra, is a junior. she's just finished her junior year, and as soon as they started playing Pomp and Circumstance, I choked up and was like, "Oh
Mm.
my word, I cannot. I don't even have a child graduating this year, and this is wrecking me. I will have to be in the lobby next year because I will
Oh,
be, or in the back, I'll be such an embarrassing mess." So just trying to imagine what that will be like when I'm having like secondhand grief for these other moms, and just
right.
the pride of these accomplished children and teens now, young adults, all that they've been able to do, and just what's ahead of them. And I think some of like why I get choked up is also thinking about the families, like the parents of the graduates, not just thinking about the
Hmm.
graduates, but like what that must be. And there's so much of it in the room at the same time, kind of
Right.
like I'm kind of taking on some of that, like I'm just feeling it deeply. So, along with some of that, too, like we've talked a lot about making faith, allowing our adult children to make their own faith journey, like being okay with that, and talking about rhythms of their own, like kind of forming their own rhythms and what their home traditions will be like, whether we're talking about holidays or birthdays or how they approach mealtime, or but just them realizing they have the autonomy to make their home what they want it to be. They're not going to automatically just kind of co-opt everything that was
Right.
from our home with them. They're not just going to kind of replicate that. So, what is that like when you see, have you experienced any of your adult children kind of approaching holidays differently or doing a birthday? Like, what is that like when those rhythms maybe don't match what it has been at home with them growing up? Has that been a thing at all?
I feel like the college process and that season kind of prepares you a little bit for the
Mm,
after college season. But
mm,
one of the things I will say is you feel that kind of that sadness with the pomp and circumstance and the weight of it all. And the thing that I was surprised by was launching them into college and college drop off and all of that. It was so much more exciting than I thought it would be. Like, I was so excited for them. And I feel like that's what it has been like with our oldest launching into kind of her career and a full-time job and having her own place. And like, it's so much more exciting and a lot less sad than I thought I would feel.
mhm,
There is a real joy of seeing them flourish and set up home the way they want it to be.
mhm,
And it's interesting to see what things they take from home as far as like routines and traditions, and then what they kind of have on their own. Like my daughter, we did fun like family birthdays where we would do streamers and decorations, but it was all just kind of for them at home. And seeing how my daughter will have all of her friends over for a craft night or something at her house, and the way that she decorates and plans and prepares, I can see similar things of how we did that at home, and just seeing like her intentionality and thoughtfulness. And, I can see like, oh, those were things that we were, different kind of things we were doing at home. And then just the distance, you, Jennifer, have a lot of family close to you that your kids have grown up with having grandparents and cousins at all of like, holidays and things like that. And then with our grown children being farther away and realizing, okay, Christmas and Thanksgiving and birthdays, it may not involve us together. And I feel like that is hard, definitely. But we have kind of approached it with, we want you home whenever you can be home. And we don't want them to feel
mm,
pressure to be here. Like, we want them to want to be here
mhm,
and to not feel forced to be here. And, a lot of them with school schedules and work schedules and things like that, they haven't been able to be here. So it's very much an open-handedness, a letting go, and really kind of seeing what path they pave for themselves, and
mhm,
just trying to keep those connections open, and communication and conversation and availability and things like
mhm.
that. I don't know if that answers your question in a roundabout way, but
No, it does. It definitely does. The idea of having both at the same time with your adult children, like there's always a place for you anytime, but we don't have, it's kind of like the faith thing. Like,
Mm,
of course, I want you here, but I am open to whatever you choose. So, like, always having, there's always an invitation, but not an expectation, because the expectation leads to
mhm.
pressure and resentment. And I've even felt that with certain elements of adulthood and like trying to balance things between my side of the family and my husband's side of the family and feeling the tension of not being able to balance well and feeling some resentment in my heart towards the places where I feel like there's more pressure or more pull. So being
Mhm.
mindful of that because I don't want to put that on my children because
Right.
I do want them to come when they can. So let's switch gears if we can and let's start talking about significant others and
Mm.
what that's like and what are some of the wonderful things and some of the challenges and the places where we kind of step in and step aside.
Well, that is something we haven't had to navigate a whole lot. None of our children are married. And so it's one of those things that I really have leaned on the women ahead of me, like the mentors ahead of me, to kind of talk about how to navigate that because I really feel like when or if any of them get married, I feel like navigating that it's going to be a big transition. And from what I've seen with my mentors and their children getting married and having in-laws and things, I think it brings in a whole different dynamic. And like you said, of like expectations and pressures and things like that. But anytime that our children have had boyfriend situation, we have kind of gone with this philosophy of we want to be, if they love that person, we want to welcome them in and get to know them and love them and realize it's another, no matter what happens through that relationship, like it's another person that you can mentor and shine the light of Christ to and
Mm.
show them God's love. So we have kind of had just more of an open-handed, it's kind of a theme with these older children is just this
Yes.
open-handedness and a welcoming. One book I read that I thought was very helpful, it's called Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Keep Your Mouth Shut and the Welcome Mat Out. And it definitely is leaning more towards out of college adult children. So I definitely think, don't be turned off by the keep your mouth shut. It's not saying that you don't have a voice at all, but it was so helpful in thinking about when they have a significant other and then navigating all of that with them. So it was a very helpful resource just to kind of get my mind and heart preparing for that season.
I will say that in my kind of early to mid 20s, before I met Carrie, before I met my husband, I was dating somebody who had just really precious parents. And I went through significant anxiety and depression after 9/11, and it became debilitating. It was so significant that he contacted his parents and they came down from Roanoke to Wilmington.
Oh,
Well, I was living in Leland. They came and got me and took me back to their home in Roanoke in the mountains and took me to a doctor. And she took care of me and fed me and tucked me in and just mothered me in a way that I had never been mothered. And I really needed it because I was
mm,
just so lost, not understanding how to process one, what was happening in the world, and then two, why I was reacting the way that I was and what was happening to me, to my
right.
brain, to my emotions, to my heart, my spirit. And while I was staying with them, she took me to a food pantry that their church served, and we worked in the food pantry. And I remember one day sitting in her living room during that trip up there, and I was just kind of pouring my heart out, and she said, "Jennifer, it's going to be okay." And she started telling me about the sovereignty of God
Wow.
and about the Lord's love and plan for me. And I'd grown up in the church. I accepted Jesus at camp when I was like 8, but I never had a personal relationship with
Mm,
Jesus. And I did not have a sense of hope from what I
mm,
had been what I was going through, my mental health situation. And the way that she talked to me and taking me to the food pantry and making me realize there's so much more to the world than what's going on in my little head and my little life,
mhm.
and that I have purpose and there are people with needs. There are people who have to come get their groceries from this warehouse. There's so much more.
Right.
That changed my life.
Wow.
And that is when I started pursuing a relationship with Jesus as an adult, was as a result of her caring for me. And
Mm,
I am still connected with them through social media. We are still in touch. They are just precious, precious
mm.
people. And I know that I could call them right now and they would drop everything and be there for me. But I
Wow.
truly believe that by me being brought into that family as a significant other just for that season, it changed my life. And I
Mhm.
truly believe it was so that my relationship with his mother, with my friend, I believe that that relationship with her was the purpose
Wow.
of that relationship, of that
Hmm.
dating relationship, if that makes sense. Like it,
Yes.
so that's one of those things where I think there may come a time when there's a significant other that's brought into our home, and it's not meant to be a forever marriage type scenario, but it may be that there's a really significant purpose for that season that could change somebody's life.
Right. Wow.
It changed mine.
That is so powerful. And it gives you such a more just eternal perspective instead of,
Yes.
yeah, that's so good. So, Jennifer, you have had your parents and your husband's parents kind of around since the girls were little, right? In proximity. And I just wonder, like, what advice you would have, or if you want to tell any of your story, as far as like, how do you navigate having your nuclear family and then involving grandparents? And what did that look like? Or what did you learn through that process?
Well, I can speak to that as somebody who may potentially be in the minority. I would say I will probably do something very, very similar to our adult children and their spouses as what my parents and my in-laws have done for me.
Mm,
We've been very fortunate. My parents and Carrie's parents have both been so gracious. And so his parents have been so welcoming and loving to me from the very beginning, treating me like I was, and I was the third out of the four adult children. I was the third spouse to be brought into the family. So there's four kids. Carrie was the third out of all four of the kids to get married. So they had some experience, but
mhm.
I still think even if I was the first one, it would have been the same. They have always just loved me, cared for me, called themselves mom and dad to me, always made me feel welcome and important to them. And with the grandkids, they have never told us how to parent. They have always just loved on our kids and been there for them. They've always been willing to attend the girls' events if they've got recitals or anything like that, performances. They've always just been genuinely invested and interested. And if they can't come, they can't, and that's okay, but just genuinely supportive.
Mm,
And they stay in touch with the girls. Our girls have their own relationship. Like we all have our own relationships with the grandparents.
mm,
I have a personal relationship with Carrie's mom. I have a relationship with Carrie's dad. He has his own relationships with each of my parents.
mm,
So I think what I would do that would be the same for when our girls are married is cultivate my own relationship with their spouses, have healthy boundaries, like to respect the boundaries too. That's something that my parents and his parents have been just top shelf about. They have been so respectful of us and never disciplining behind our back, never critiquing our discipline. Just felt very little, if any, judgment from them at all.
How did you navigate, like when the girls were little, those conversations? And or was it a conversation, or did it just flow naturally as far as like boundaries, or like did you want them to teach or direct or discipline the girls the same way you did, or like what was that like?
I would say really when they were little, it was the only things that I ever really felt like I had to give much guidance on were like schedule, if there was a nap schedule that needed to
Hmm.
happen. And sometimes they would honor that, sometimes they wouldn't, whatever. Looking back now, it felt like a big deal then, but looking back now, I'm like, whatever. In the I think in the moment, like we talked with the toddler moms, who that
Hmm.
episode will air next week or in a couple weeks. In the moment, it feels like a huge thing, but then when you
Right.
look back, look like now, I think, oh my goodness, the grandparents of my children were invested and willing to participate and be there. It's really,
Right.
you know, not a huge deal. I'd say food choices were probably the
Hmm.
place where I felt ignored some,
Hmm.
and that felt like a big deal to me. I would say food choices and sleeping, like sleep
Yeah.
schedule type stuff. But those years go by so fast that in the grand
Hmm.
scheme of parenting and grandparenting, it's really not a thing. And I don't
Hmm.
know that discipline was ever really something that we had to I mean, my all the grandparents were just really good at gentle correction,
Hmm.
and I'm thankful for that.
Hmm. And probably, like you said, those individual relationships
Hmm.
probably played a part, I would think, in that of just kind of that openness and everybody understanding each other kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is a conversation that could definitely have a lot of different extensions, kind of digging deeper into each of the things that we've covered. And I know that there's more that we haven't covered. So if you have questions or more feedback for us or things that you'd like for us to maybe cover on our social media, please send us a message. We always wrap each episode with a few action steps. And so I will start by, we're just going to give you two today. The first one is to just figure out, kind of do an assessment of the relationships in your life to see, do you have closeness with people who are before you and where you are and after you? So, someone who is not quite in your season of life yet, someone that you can pour into, someone who shares the same season of life so that you have someone to relate to, and then someone who's beyond where you are who can pour into you and share that wisdom. So that's step number one. And then number two, initiate reading a book together with somebody who's in one of those three groups in your life. For me right now, I'm reading a book with a friend who's actually going to be on one of our upcoming episodes, and she has a 2-year old. So we are reading a book together about discipline. It's by Clay Clarkson, Heartfelt Discipline. So that is something you could do. Pick one of those people, those relationships, and find a book that you both would enjoy reading together. And you can just continue having those honest conversations about parenting and just all of the hard and beautiful things that really do matter.
And I will link some of the books also in
Mm.
our show notes page. One of the ones that I'm reading is Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And that is one of the books that I'm reading with one of the young adult women that I meet with. So there are so many great books, and a book is a great way to initiate. It's kind of a neutral thing of it's not just all your opinion. It gives you something to kind of spark conversation, and it's a great tool to get together for coffee or whatever you want to do and to read that book together.
That's great. And then one final action step would be to commit to praying for your children, even if they are not quite in that 18 plus group yet. They will be one day, Lord willing. And so we would encourage you to seek the Lord in prayer, seek his wisdom and his guidance, and ask for discernment in how to begin praying for all that new season of life as a parent will involve. We thank you for finding a moment with us. Please catch up with us on our social media on Instagram, Find a Moment Podcast, and let us know what you'd like to hear or give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and we will talk to you next time.